Well, I stuck my foot in it that time, and boy, did I get dragged across the carpet. I had the gall to suggest that the venerable 30-30 Winchester was equaled in the 21st century by this little pipsqueak cartridge, the 300 Blackout. And boy, did I catch it. We're going to see if we can't straighten it out and find a new competitor for the 30-30 Winchester in the 21st century on this episode of Ron Spomer Outdoors. Well, it's always tough when you say anything negative about the old 30-30. This venerable cartridge has been around since 1895, and it is, or at least was, and in the minds of many, it still is, the preeminent whitetail deer hunting cartridge in the world. End of story. So see you next time. No, I think we'll dive a little bit deeper in this. Some time ago, not too long ago, I did an episode in which I compared the good old 30-30 to the bad new 300 Blackout, which when you look at the two, no wonder people dragged me on the carpet and said, that's ridiculous. There's no way that little thing can come close to the 30-30. But I did the ballistic research and I came up with the numbers. You take the velocity of the cartridge, the weight of the bullet, and the ballistics coefficient of the bullet, and you run it through the ballistics calculators and you find out how much energy that bullet carries when it leaves the muzzle. And you find out how much it carries when it gets downrange to the target. And that's why the Blackout, despite its smaller powder reservoir, can not only keep up with, but eventually surpass the performance of the 30-30. It's because it has a more ballistically efficient bullet that doesn't waste its energy pushing wind out of the way. So they both start off with more than enough energy to take a deer. The 30-30 has a little bit more, but by 100 yards, they're pretty much tied, and beyond that, that little Blackout starts to take over. So I said the Blackout could be seen, don't have to say it this way, but it could be seen as sort of the 21st century new all-around whitetail woods cartridge, doing pretty much what the good old 30-30 did. The only difference, and the really big difference, is that you don't have it in a lever action. You have it in the AR-15 style. And you can make it in bolt actions too, but I don't think anybody has a lever action for it. So, people complained, and a lot of them suggested a few other better options, and one of them is what we're going to cover today. Believe it or not, we're finally getting to it. It's the 350 Legend. Yes, this is the new 35 caliber cartridge, and as you can see, it looks a lot bigger than that little Blackout, and it has a 35 caliber bullet, a .357 to be exact. Some sources say .355, some say you can load a 3.8, but technically, according to the SAMI specs, it should be a .357 inch diameter bullet, like the 357 Magnum. So, you've got a wider bullet, but what are the weights? Gosh, I did some research and I was amazed at how many different weight bullets were available in the 350 Legend. From a 124 grain full metal jacketed bullet, which is extremely light, to an extremely heavy 265 grain bullet. Whoa. So it suggests that this 350 Legend is doing more than just going deer hunting. It's being used for plinking, perhaps even small game hunting. Might not be a bad option for coyotes. And with those big heavy bullets, they're doing suppressed loads. You're keeping the velocities under about 1,100 feet per second, which puts them under the sound barrier at sea level. That means you've got a really soft report with no ballistic sonic crack involved. Put a suppressor on the front of the gun, and the hog hunters are going wild. So the 350 has got some versatility to it. In that regard, it already beats the 30-30 because it's pretty hard to find a 30-30 with anything but maybe 150 grain bullet, 160, 170. Over the years, there have been some as heavy as 190 and probably some as light as 130 or 125. And of course, if you're a hand loader, you've got various options because it is a 30 caliber and you can get down as light as a 100 grain bullet in the 30s. Just make sure you're not putting the sharply tipped ones on there. There's always that concern about in a tubular fed system. The magazine is tubular and those cartridges are lined up like this. You might just set off the primer with the recoil. I know there are plenty of videos out there showing that it can't be done, but this is the industry standard, and I'm not going to buck the trend on that one and have someone get injured. But how does the ballistic performance of that 35 compare to the 30-30? Those of you who are a little more sophisticated on ballistics know that it's not just the width of the bullet or the weight of the bullet, it's the shape of the bullet too. You've got to take a lot of things into account before you can really get a firm grasp of how these things are going to perform terminally at distance and getting there too, and that's called the trajectory curve. So we did some numbers on that stuff and came up with our handy dandy chart once again. But before we get into that chart, and before we discover a few more options instead of just the 350 Legend, I want to tell you a little bit more about that 350 Legend. Now, I've already done a YouTube video highlighting it, describing what it does, but let's just review it a little bit, see where it came from and what it's doing. So a lot of folks will say, well, it's the 223 Remington straightened out, but that's not quite right. The rim size is the same. I think it's .373. But the body size at the head is a little bigger, it's .39. So it's actually a rebated rim cartridge. And then it's a straight wall with obviously a little bit of taper in it. They got to taper it a little bit so you get easy extraction. Tapers down to about .37, something like that. And then it can take that .57 bullet, but hand loaders are saying they can get the .358 bullets in there as well. And you think about that, oh my gosh, is it going to blow up the gun? When you think about 0.001, 1/1000th of a difference in your bullet diameter is probably not going to create a huge problem. You see that fairly often across the industry. The bullets aren't exactly precisely that measurement. They can vary enough, and they can make it down the barrel. We don't recommend you go loading those, but folks are doing it, saying it works. I would stick with what it says either on the ammo boxes or in your loading manuals. And I would advise most users of the 350 Legend to very carefully consider whether you want to hand load it at all. We're going to discuss some of those issues here in a little bit. So why did they make this 350? Obviously, it's a straight wall cartridge for states that require straight wall cartridges for deer hunting. There are not a lot of them, but they are in popular deer hunting areas, so there is a lot of interest in this. Ohio, I think Indiana, not sure about Illinois, maybe some in Michigan yet. It's starting to open up more and more, but there are several Midwest states where this is a requirement. And not only does it have to be straight wall, but it has to be usually 35 caliber or larger, and can't be any longer than a certain dimension. It's usually like 1.8 inches, which pushes a lot of older straight wall cartridges right out of consideration. That's, I think, why Winchester decided to come out with this. Somebody had to put out a new, easily procured, mild shooting, and deadly effective deer hunting round in a straight wall, and this is what they came up with. And I think they did a fairly good job of it. Now, there are some issues, and we're going to get to those. Now, some of the limitations to the 350 Legend, you can't get it in a lever action. And that's, to me, that's too bad because, gosh, given its limited range and everything and its close proximity to the performance of the 30-30, it just seems like a natural for the good old lever action. And there's so much fun in the woods. But then again, you don't get the 30-30 in an AR-15, so this is the 21st century, and that's kind of the new popular option. We've gone from lever actions into these MSRs, type rifles, the AR-15s. So that's why I think it's probably positioned just right to become extremely popular. Now, let's look at some of the ballistic performance to match these two up. We've got the 350 Legend shooting 150 grain extreme point bullet from Winchester. They claim the BC on that is .223, and their muzzle velocity is 2,325 feet per second. And the muzzle energy then is 1,801 foot-pounds. That's more than enough to take a whitetail. Probably get an elk with it too. And then I zeroed these things to be no higher than 2.5 inches, 2.5 inches, because a lot of woods hunters say, look, I'm not trying to shoot to the other side of the moon, but I do need a fairly flat trajectory through the woods in case I have to shoot through a little gap in the trees and whatnot. I don't want that bullet arcing way up there. So we're going to keep it down. It maxes out at 2.5 inches above your point of aim at 100 yards. And thereafter, it begins to slowly drop until it's 2.5 inches below your target, and I call that your maximum point-blank range. A deer's chest will give you a little more than that, but you can always play with these numbers and set it up any way you want. But that's what I picked. So the maximum point-blank range on the 350 Legend then would be 200 yards. And as you look down our chart, you're going to notice that boy, right about 190 to 203 yards, somewhere in that range, they're all going to land right in there for their maximum performance, maximum point blank range. That means you go off into the woods deer hunting and you see a deer, and if it pretty much in the eastern woods, if you see a deer, he's going to be inside of 200 yards. You've got to look pretty hard to find one beyond that. So if you're hunting where most of your shots are in that 50 to 150 yard range, you just hold dead on and you don't have to worry about anything. And that's pretty nice. So here's what's going to happen when we compare that one 350, 150 grain to the 30-30 with its famous and ubiquitous 150 grain bullet. That one has a BC of 0.232. It's actually a little bit higher. This is a ballistic silver tip. And the muzzle velocity is a little slower, 2,250 feet per second, so you get a little less energy. Muzzle energy is 1686 foot-pounds. Maximum point-blank range, 193 yards, big deal. Pretty much the same performance. So at 100 yards, you're 2.6 inches high. With the 350, 2.5 inches high with the 30-30. You can look at your wind deflections in black, 2 inches for both of them. The energy's 1290, 1219. Deer's not going to notice. Go out to 150 yards, and you're still an inch and a third high with the 350, 1.1 inches high with the 30-30. So there's a teeny advantage there in the 350, or in the 30-30. And the wind deflection is 4.7 inches on both of them. The energies are, again, pretty close, 10,083 versus 10,028. And now at your extreme range of 200 yards, 2.5 inches of drop out of the 350, 3.1 inches of drop out of the 30-30. Windage is again the same, 8.7, 8.7, and your energies are just under 1,000, 905, 865. Again, we like to say 1,000 foot-pounds of energy on a deer, but really, it's no big deal if it's 800 or 1,000 or 1,100 or something. Deer's probably not going to notice. You're going to get pretty effective performance. So there's why you can say the 350 Legend is pretty much running neck and neck with the 30-30. So it's pretty much the same argument I put out on that 300. You know, the 350 was kind of designed for the AR-15s like the Blackout was, so the Blackout isn't a straight-walled cartridge, so you can't use it in those straight-wall states. But some of the sharper guys out there are going to say, hey, yeah, but you can make that 30-30 perform a lot better if you use those FTX rubber-tipped bullets from Hornady. They've got a higher BC because they're sharply pointed, rubber tips, safe to use in tubular magazines and all the rest. So it's only fair to compare it with one of those. All right, we're going to do that. We're going to use the 160 grain FTX load from Hornady. BC is 0.241. They're listing the muzzle velocity at 2,300 feet per second. So the energy there is 1880. The maximum point blank range, 197 yards. Once again, no higher than 2.5 inches. We're going to compare it to the Legend with, guess what? Hornady offers that same rubber-tipped FTX bullet in the 350 Legend. I'm not quite sure why, because you don't have to put those into any tubular magazines that I know of. I've never found a lever action chamber for this one. Probably won't because it does not have the rim. It doesn't have space on the rim. It's got the rebated rim, and those don't tend to work in those tubular magazine fed rifles. And we're going to get back to that rebated rim issue and the non-bottlenecked. We're going to have a little bit of a problem here. We're going to talk about that real quick. So at any rate, we've got the 350 Legend 165 grain bullet. BC is 0.250, a little bit better. Muzzle velocity is 100 feet per second less, 2,200 feet per second. So they're going to balance out pretty nicely. Muzzle energy, 1773. Maximum point blank range, same thing, 197. What happens? 100 yards, 2.5 high, 2 inches of deflection, 1,309. Look at the numbers. They're so close. It's practically the same thing. At 150 yards, you're an inch high with the 350, an inch 0.3 high with the 30-30. 4.5 wind deflection with the 350, 4.4 wind deflection with the 30-30. Gosh, they're twins. Let's go to 200 yards where we've got 3.2 inches of drop out of that 350 Legend, and now the 30-30 starting to pull away a little bit, but not much. 2.5 inches, 2.5 inches of drop. I don't think anybody's going to miss a target with that. 8.2 inches of deflection in the wind. That's a right angle wind, 10 miles an hour. Kind of the standard, and that's in the 350, and the 30-30, 8 inches, so 0.2 of an inch difference there, nothing to sneeze at. 951 foot-pounds of energy out of the 350, 994 out of the 30-30. So if you guys are going strictly by numbers and you want to say, rah, rah, I win, 30-30 wins at 200 yards. But again, practically, for deer hunting, is really no difference. So those are the things you want to consider. And the problem is, of course, that you can't use the 30-30 in these straight-walled states. So no matter how good it is, no matter how much you love it, if you want to be legal, you better not be messing around with it. You're going to almost have to go with the 350 Legend, unless you want to raise some of the other potentials to combat that one. So we're going to dive into those here in a little bit. Hey guys, look what the attic turned up. I don't know how the glare is, but this is a rifle bullet book. Several friends and I joined in and wrote chapters on all the different bullets that are out there, the types, how they work, how they're built, what they're good for, terminal performance, everything from plinking bullets and varmint bullets up to the big dangerous game bullets. So if you're interested, I think this thing has been out of print for several years. You can find one on eBay every once in a while, but I've got some pristine copies here, about 13 or so, and they are all autographed by all of the authors. So you got all the signatures inside there. If you're looking for a collector's piece, check out Ron Spomer's store on ronspomeroutdoors.com. Just go to the store, and I think the team should have that book up for sale here pretty quick. And talk about some of the limitations on that 350 Legend. Now, I've got to admit, when this thing came out in 2019, I thought, what a silly idea. This tiny little thing in a 35 caliber, you're going to have a low sectional density, and those bullets are going to be short and stubby, inefficient. What's the big deal? Well, I've proved myself wrong just by doing my ballistic research already. But there are some issues with the 350 that raise eyebrows. And here's what those are, the limitations. As I mentioned, it's not available in a lever action, and that was really too sad. I wish they would just make, they probably can't. Yeah, they could. Why not? Just put a rim on it. Make a rimmed version. Then you could run it in a lever action. But thus far, no such. Here's the big problem, head spacing. You guys know what head spacing is, right? Remember it? Head spacing is what on a cartridge stops it from moving too far into the chamber. And with the 30-30 and other rimmed cartridges, it's that rim that hits the breech of the barrel and stops. Now, bottleneck cartridges will stop on the bottleneck. And an example of that is this one that very few people know, but unfortunately they should know, because that is a great AR-15 cartridge. It's the 30 AR Remington. And that, as you can see, is going to fit in the same magazines that the 223 fits into, and the 350 Legend and all the rest of them for the ARs, but it's got a fat case, and it drives the 150 grain bullet with a really sleek pointed tip on it for some high efficiency. That's a good one. Now that one is head spacing on the shoulder, and you can see how that would work. You shove that inside of the chamber, and the wall of the chamber stops it right there. There's your head spacing. Now look at that 350. What is going to stop that thing from shoving right up into the rifling? Well, that's not going to be the rim. It doesn't stick out. Not going to be the shoulder, because there isn't one. It's going to be the mouth of the case itself. And look at that tiny little rim of mouth on there. Yikes! How are you going to depend on that mouth to catch that little bit of lip that they would carve into the front of the chamber area? Well, apparently they're able to do it because it works. And it's not the only cartridge in the world that does that. The 45 ACP does the same thing, and so does the 9mm Luger. So they've been around for ages and ages, and they work beautifully. But hand loading can become problematic, because when you fire, brass tends to stretch a little bit. Well, if your head space is depending on the mouth of the case, you've got to have the exact same length every time. You can't let it afford to get a little bit longer, a little bit longer, a little bit longer before you trim, which is what happens with bottleneck cartridges. You've got to make sure it's trimmed perfectly every time. So that becomes kind of critical. The other thing, probably not a big problem with the 350 Legend, but with hard kicking cartridges and straight walls, you often have to crimp the case lip into the bullet. That's why you have cantilers around a lot of bullets. You crimp into that. And man, you can't go crimping on this thing, because you've changed the dimensions. That wall that stops that cartridge for head spacing, that mouth, has to be right out there at the right dimension. So there's where you could see some problems coming in with hand loading. So I'm not hand loading this one myself right now, but it is a caution. I don't know if folks who are doing it. If you're not a hand loader and you just want to shoot factory rounds, I think you're golden with the 350 because it comes in so many different flavors from so many different manufacturers already. It is a highly successful cartridge. Somebody at Winchester told me it's one of their top selling cartridges these days. And I have seen, I've seen ammo from Browning, Hornady, Federal, Remington even. I think they still make a load here. Couple of others. Yeah, you're just going to find a lot of options out there. And as I've already mentioned, the sizes of the bullets. And it's not just the weights of the bullet, but it's the types. You get your full metal jackets for the inexpensive plinking, and then you've got some all copper bullets, hollow points and whatnot for the non-leaded areas. And then you've got various designs and types of lead core bullets, plastic tips and not plastic tips, and all the rest of it. So it's out there and it's doing pretty darn well. So if you are looking for a replacement for the 30-30, or if you have to hunt in a state where you've got to use a straight wall cartridge and you love what the 30-30 does for deer hunting, I really don't think you can go wrong by grabbing that 350 Legend. It really is a pretty close trajectory matchup for the 30-30. And I think that's the concern of most of the deer hunters. They just want to be legal with a cartridge that's widely available in a rifle that they like. Now I'm saying rifles that you like. A lot of us don't really care to handle the AR-15 style rifles. They think they're bulky and clunky and just don't like them and make a lot of noise and whatever. If that's not your thing, there are a lot of bolt action rifles already chambered for that 350. Mossberg has them, Browning has them, Winchester, Savage, Ruger. I think you snoop around, you're going to find all sorts of them. And single shots. A lot of young folks start off hunting deer with light recoiling rifles. Well, the 350 Legend is light in recoil. And those are some numbers that I didn't read to you on the chart. You may have noticed them under the R, under each one of them. We had recoil energies of 9 foot-pounds with a 150 grain bullet. And in the 165 grain bullet, it was only 10.6. And you work your way up with the heavier bullets, you get more recoil. But those are milder than a 243 shooting a 100 grain bullet. So that is a great starter, or anybody who just can't handle recoil for some reason or another. This guy is probably pretty effective that way too. So you can get a small short. Oh, by the way, speaking of short, all of these numbers were taken out of 20-inch barrels. Seems to be optimum for the 350. Pretty common in the 30-30. You can get the 30-30 to shoot a little bit faster with 24-inch barrels. That's what they were way back when. But their handiness in the woods and all, they pretty much come down to being a 20-inch barrel option. So once again, they match up pretty nicely. Now, some folks are going to say, well, Ron, you blew it on the 300 Blackout. That's stupid. And now you blew it on the 350 Legend because that's stupid. This is the king right here, the 30-30. You're just way off base. But if you have to use a straight wall cartridge and you don't like the 350 Legend, what are you going to use? I did some research on all the options out there. I thought I knew pretty much what was there, but here's what I looked at and came up with, and we're going to cover some of this stuff in future videos. 357 Remington Maximum. They took the 357 Magnum and they stretched it, made the Maximum, and it fits inside of these restrictions for length, but it has a lower maximum average chamber pressure than the 350 Legend, so it can't generate as high of velocities. Good option, still going to work fine for you, especially in a rifle, but you just can't be expecting it to hit the same velocities with the same weight bullets. Then there's the 375 Winchester, which is an old round. Well, it's not really all that old, but it's based on the 35-55 black powder round from late in the 19th century. They straightened that thing out, made it straight wall, 375, put it out in a big bore Winchester lever action rifle, which is pretty darn cool. Problem there, the case is 2.02 inches long. There's a little more recoil shooting a big 375 caliber, .375, so you're going to be shooting some fairly heavy bullets there. But that would be a good option if you didn't have that length restriction, and some states might not have that, so you might want to consider a 375 Winchester if you can find it in one of the good old lever actions. Man, that would be fun. I don't know that they still chamber it anymore. Then there's the 44 Remington Magnum, which is a straight-walled cartridge, mostly used in wheel guns. And because of that, because they're in revolvers, they again have lower maximum average pressures. So you can't get your pressures high enough, so you end up shooting fairly low velocities, around 1,500 feet per second, and some fairly blunt bullets, typical revolver bullets. You don't get long pointed bullets in revolvers. Then you just step up to the 454 Casull, pretty much shooting the same bullets, just a little more energy in them because it's a little bit bigger cartridge. The 460 Smith & Wesson is probably one of your better bets. Again, it's in wheel guns. I suspect if you chambered it in a rifle, especially in a single shot, you could increase those pressures a little bit, but kind of hard to find some really effective high BC bullets for that baby. Again, you're going to be shooting those pistol bullets, flat noses, fairly inefficient. Then there's the 4570 Government, which a lot of people think about rather quickly, like, okay, straight wall cartridge, 4570. Well, it's 2.1 inches long, so it doesn't fit into that length restriction again. Then there's the 500 Smith & Wesson, and now you've got the same problems you had with the 460 and the 44 Rem Mag in those. It's a pistol round, has lower average pressures, has heavy recoil anyway, and low BC bullets. But, that's a real horse. Then there's the 405 Winchester, an older, long, straight-walled cartridge, but again, too long, 2.5 inches long. Then there's the 444 Marlin, and we're going to do one of our next videos on that one because a lot of people bring that up and say, that thing is almost as good as the 4570, maybe even a little bit better. Why don't you use that straight wall? Big problem, 2.25 inches long about. It's a little bit too long again. But man, the ballistics of it pretty well match up with this 350 Legend. So, just on the outside chance that there is a state that allows a bit longer straight wall cartridge, I think we're going to cover it. It would be fun just to see how it performs ballistically to this much smaller 350 Legend anyway. And then the final one we're going to address is one I really don't want to, because it's the 7.62 by 39. That's the Soviet cartridge, military round from the Soviet Union. And these days, I'm not too pleased with Russia, so I'm not going to be advocating for their cartridge. It's kind of silly. I suppose it's been around since, gosh, World War II anyway, maybe even World War I. But it is one that comes up quite a bit, and it's interesting to see what the ballistics of that little thing will do compared to the 30-30 and the 350. So those kind of are your options in the straight wall cartridge. It really strikes me that somebody needs to come out with another one. If they're going to continue this limitation on no bottleneck cartridges for deer hunting in some states, and folks want a little bit more performance than you would get from a typical 30-30, and they don't like the 350 Legend because it's not any better, we might want to investigate something else. So hang on to your seats. You know how they like to crank out new cartridges. They might have some more down the pike. We'll keep our eyes open. When they pop up, we'll report on them. In the meantime, this is Ron Spomer, urging all of you to hunt honest and shoot straight. And check out that 350 Legend and run the ballistics against some of the other short pistol rounds out there and see if it doesn't hang right in there. Because as far as I can see, it's the 30-30 and another set of clothes.